Just 60 kilometers, 37 miles, from the northern tip of Vancouver Island, one of the most commercially active regions in the Pacific Northwest, a silent giant is waking up. Hidden 600 meters, 1,970 feet beneath the surface of the Hecate Strait, the Apex submarine caldera has been building a massive magma chamber that scientists from the Geological Survey of Canada and the University of British Columbia only confirmed in October 2024. This isn't theoretical. Right now, new data shows it is recharging at a dangerously accelerating rate. It has not erupted in nearly 4 centuries, but what happened in March of 2026 changed everything we thought we understood about volcanic risk in Canada. We are talking about the Apex volcano, a submarine colossus that is drawing serious, around-the-clock concern from researchers all over the country. When most people think of volcanoes, they picture a cone-shaped mountain with lava. But beneath the world's oceans, there are far more volcanoes than on land, and the vast majority of them remain completely invisible to us. Apex is one of those. It sits approximately 600 meters below the sea surface, a structure that would dominate any on-land landscape. To understand the scale of the threat, think not just of the potential explosion, but the location. It sits near the culturally and ecologically vital waters of Haida-Gwaii and the critical marine shipping corridors connecting the port of Prince Rupert to global markets. The escalation began with a whisper that quickly turned into a roar. At 3:14 a.m. on March 12, 2026, seismographs managed by Natural Resources Canada and Arcan began registering a relentless sequence of tremors focused approximately 10 kilometers northeast of the Brooks Peninsula on Vancouver Island. This was not the typical tectonic grinding of the Cascadia subduction zone. This was something more rhythmic, more shallow, and far more aggressive. Over the following 30 days, more than 30,000 earthquakes were recorded between northern Vancouver Island and the southern reaches of Haida-Gwaii. The Geological Survey of Canada, GSC, reported over 15,000 seismic events in just 15 days, a concentration of energy never before documented in the Hecate Strait with this level of intensity. The largest individual event reached a magnitude of 5.3 on the moment magnitude scale, sending a clear signal. The Apex submarine caldera was no longer dormant. On March 18, 2026, the British Columbia government, in coordination with Public Safety Canada, declared a local state of emergency for the regional district of Mount Waddington and the Skinner-Queen Charlotte region. Schools in Port Hardy and Alert Bay were closed. Residents were advised by emergency officials to secure their properties and, in an unusual directive, to drain large outdoor water tanks and municipal reservoirs. The movement of massive water volumes during sustained harmonic tremors could destabilize the saturated foundations common in coastal BC. Approximately 11,000 people voluntarily evacuated from the most exposed coastal communities, as international volcanological teams, invited by the GSC, arrived to deploy additional sensors from the Ocean Networks Canada Neptune Observatory. The technical data arriving in real time was staggering. Using a cutting-edge imaging technique called full waveform inversion, essentially a geological ultrasound, a team of geophysicists from the University of British Columbia and Natural Resources Canada managed to visualize the volcano's plumbing system with unprecedented clarity. The technology fires acoustic waves from research vessels at the surface. These waves slow down dramatically when they hit partially molten rock. The resulting 3D X-ray revealed a massive magma chamber extending from 2 to 4 kilometers below the seafloor. It is roughly 600 meters wide, containing 1.4 cubic kilometers of accumulated magma. To visualize that scale, it is the equivalent of 560,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of molten rock, pressurized at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. Even more alarming was the recharge rate. The study confirmed the magma system has been expanding at an average rate of 4 million cubic meters every single year since its last known eruption in 1650. It has been breathing in silently for nearly 4 centuries. AGSC lead researcher stated in a March 2026 briefing, if this inflation trajectory maintains its current velocity, the internal pressure will reach the 1,650 threshold within the next 24 months. We are seeing a system at its limit. The risk to Canadian infrastructure is immense. The Apex Caldera sits directly adjacent to the primary maritime shipping lanes for the port of Prince Rupert, a hub handling over 60 billion Canadian dollars in trade annually. A major explosive event would not only create local tsunamis, but would saturate the atmosphere with abrasive volcanic ash, grounding the air corridors that connect Vancouver to Asia and the Arctic. GNSS data from stations along the coast showed a 12 cm horizontal offset and a 10 cm uplift in the surrounding seabed in just 3 weeks. This is ground deformation happening in real time, at a speed that suggests magma is moving through the crust, not as a slow seep, but as a high-pressure intrusion. We are watching the Earth's crust yield to the sheer force of a deep-seated magmatic engine that has finally decided to fire. The history of volcanic violence in Canada is not merely a matter of ancient prehistory. It is etched into the oral traditions and the very soil of the Pacific Northwest. To find a parallel for the threat Apex poses today, we must look to the Nass Valley in 1700. The eruption of the Tseax cone remains the deadliest volcanic disaster in Canadian history. According to the Adawak, the traditional oral histories of the Nisga'a First Nation, the event began with a rumbling in the earth and the pillar of smoke that looked as if a house was burning on the mountain top. It wasn't just ash. A 32-kilometer-long lava flow engulfed 3 villages, claiming the lives of an estimated 2,000 people. For centuries, this was viewed as an isolated tragedy of the inland mountains. But what we are witnessing in the Hecate Strait in 2026 suggests a much larger, interconnected engine of destruction that operates both on land and beneath the waves. +1. In November of 2025, just months before the current crisis, a landmark study published in the journal Nature by researchers at the University of Victoria and the Geological Survey of Canada delivered a revelation that fundamentally shifted the risk profile for the entire province. The data proved that the Apex submarine volcano and the dormant volcanic fields of the northern Cordilleran volcanic province are not independent systems. They are connected by a shared deep magmatic reservoir sitting over 10 kilometers beneath the crust. This is a coupled system, a discovery that explains why, as Apex began its aggressive recharge, sensors as far north as the Edziza complex began to show anomalous thermal signatures. The research team used artificial intelligence to analyze over 25,000 earthquakes recorded during the 2025 to 2026 unrest. They concluded that sheets of magma, known as dikes, had cut through the crust at depths of 12 kilometers, covering an area of approximately 20 square kilometers. The volume of magma involved in this single intrusion would be enough to fill 200,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. While the magma has not yet breached the seafloor, it is redistributing pressure across a massive underground network. During the peak of the seismic swarm in February 2026, the seafloor directly above the Apex crater subsided by 32 centimeters, nearly 13 inches, while the coastline of nearby Calvert Island rose by more than 10 centimeters. The Earth was literally breathing in synchrony, moving molten rock from one chamber to another through an invisible plumbing system we didn't know existed until the sensors began to scream. This coupling elevates the danger from a localized eruption to a regional catastrophe. If the Apex caldera suffers a structural failure, the risks extend far beyond volcanic ash. Geologists are now looking at the Delwood Seamount, a massive underestimated volcanic structure 175 kilometers southwest of Haida Gwaii. Like the Marseille volcano in the Mediterranean, Delwood rises nearly 3,000 meters from the ocean floor, but its summit is just a few hundred meters below the surface. Simulations conducted by the University of British Columbia show that a partial flank collapse of a structure this size would generate a tsunami of terrifying proportions. In the most extreme models, wave heights of up to 20 meters could impact the port of Prince Rupert and the coastal communities of the Central Coast within 20 to 40 minutes. Unlike the open Pacific, the confined waters of the Hecate Strait and the narrow fjords of the BC coast offer almost no warning time. The distances are too short. The reaction window is measured in heartbeats. This is why the GSC has fast-tracked the Multimar expedition. In early 2026, the research vessel John Pitali was dispatched to the Apex site to install high-precision pressure sensors and fiber optic cables directly into the crater. We are no longer just observing a volcano. We are monitoring the pulse of a tectonic system that is currently under more stress than at any point in the last 400 years. The data is clear. The recharging of the Apex magma chamber is not a slow geological process. It is a clock ticking down toward a threshold that was last crossed when the 1650 eruption sent toxic gas and pyroclastic surges across the sea. For Julian Chan, the operations manager at the port of Prince Rupert, the crisis of March 2026 wasn't just a geological anomaly. It was an economic heart attack. As the sequence of magnitude 5 earthquakes hammered the seabed just 150 kilometers to the south, the decision was made to halt all container traffic. Prince Rupert is Canada's third largest port, a vital artery for the national economy. With every hour the cranes stood still, 12.5 million Canadian dollars vanished. By the second week of the state of emergency, the Ghost Fleet, nearly 40 massive Panamax vessels, sat idling in the open Pacific, their crews watching the horizon for a tsunami that sensors suggested could arrive with only 20 minutes of warning. The total economic impact of the 30-day shutdown eventually eclipsed 3.8 billion Canadian dollars, a staggering blow to the national supply chain that felt more like a wartime mobilization than a natural disaster response. On the ground in Port Hardy, the reality was even more visceral. Sergeant Marcus Thorne of the RCMP recalls the atmosphere during the peak of the voluntary evacuations. It wasn't like a forest fire where you can see the smoke and know which way to run, Thorne noted in a later Public Safety Canada debrief. The threat was 600 meters under the water, invisible and silent, until the ground started shaking again. We had 11,000 people moving south on Highway 19, a single-lane artery that was never designed for that kind of volume. The order to drain swimming pools and municipal reservoirs, though seemingly minor, became a symbol of the island's vulnerability. In communities like Alert Bay and Port McNeill, the constant harmonic tremors, a low-frequency vibration that rattled windows for days on end, created a psychological toll that many residents described as torturous. The fear wasn't of what was happening, but of the big one that the Apex volcano might trigger. The infrastructure failures were immediate and cascading. On March 22nd, the seafloor deformation became so localized that a primary undersea fiber optic cable, which provides high-speed data to Haida Gwaii and the north coast, snapped under the tension of a 32-centimeter seabed subsidence. Communication blackouts hit the region instantly. Telehealth services for remote First Nations communities were severed, and emergency responders were forced to rely on aging satellite phones and shortwave radio. BC Hydro reported dozens of localized outages as the unstable, saturated soil of the North Island shifted under the weight of the tremors, toppling transmission towers. The power grid, already strained by a late winter cold snap, began to flicker, leaving thousands in temporary shelters on Campbell River, wondering if they would have hit through the night. Inside the Geological Survey of Canada's monitoring center in Sydney, Dr. Elena Ross lived a different kind of nightmare. For 20 days, she and her team didn't leave the building. surviving on coffee and data streams from the John P. Tally. We were watching the Earth's crust behave like a piece of plastic, Dr. Ross explained. The AI tools were processing 25,000 seismic events, and every one of them showed the same thing. A massive dike of magma, 20 kilometers long, was wedging itself toward the surface. We were waiting for the moment the pressure exceeded the weight of the ocean above it. The tension peaked on March 27th, when the sensors inside the Apex crater recorded a sudden, sharp rise in water temperature, from 4 degrees Celsius to 18 degrees Celsius in a matter of hours. This was the thermal spike scientists had feared, suggesting that magmatic gases were now leaching directly into the Hecate Strait. The ecological consequences began to manifest shortly after. Thousands of dead rockfish and various marine species began washing up on the shores of Calvert Island, their gills scorched by the sudden acidification of the localized waters. The sulfur dioxide plumes, while mostly contained by the depth of the ocean, began to bubble to the surface, creating a toxic mist that drifted toward the Great Bear Rainforest. Parks Canada officials expressed grave concern for the fragile coastal ecosystems, where the delicate balance of the intertidal zones was being upended by the rapid sea level fluctuations caused by the seafloor uplift. As the calendar turned toward April 2026, the immediate crisis began to stabilize, but the scars remained. The 11,000 evacuees returned to find the region changed. Foundations were cracked, roads were buckled, and the psychological security of living on the edge of the Pacific had been shattered. The Apex volcano hadn't erupted, not yet, but it had demonstrated that it could paralyze a province without even breaching the surface. The logistics of the evacuation, the billions in lost trade, and the literal breaking of the seafloor served as a brutal rehearsal for a future that scientists now say is inevitable. The question is no longer if the silent giant will wake up, but how much more of the Canadian coast it will claim when the recharge cycle finally reaches its breaking point. The relative silence that followed the March 2026 crisis was not a sign of recovery, but a transition into a new, more dangerous baseline. As of late 2026, the Geological Survey of Canada has officially reclassified the Apex submarine caldera as the highest priority volcanic threat in the country, surpassing even the long-watched Mount Meager and the Garibaldi volcanic belt. The data collected during the height of the unrest confirmed a terrifying reality. The magma chamber is not just recharging, it is accelerating. Every year, 4 million cubic meters of molten rock are being pumped into a system that is already near its structural limits. At this rate, the Apex volcano will reach the critical mass required for a catastrophic explosive eruption, comparable to the 1650 event, long before the century is out. We are no longer talking about geological time. We are talking about a human timeline, a countdown that involves the lives of our children and grandchildren. The implications for Canadian infrastructure are staggering and systemic. The vulnerability of the Pacific Gateway is no longer a theoretical exercise for urban planners. The port of Prince Rupert, which recently underwent a multi-billion-dollar expansion to become a primary hub for global trade, sits directly in the path of potential tsunami waves. Simulations run by the University of British Columbia in late 2025 suggest that even a moderate explosive event at Apex could generate a localized wave capable of overtopping the Ridley Island export terminal, causing catastrophic damage to the specialized infrastructure used for coal and liquid natural gas exports. A single 10-meter wave would not only destroy the docks, but could trigger secondary industrial disasters, leading to chemical leaks and fires that would be impossible to fight in the middle of a volcanic ashfall. Further inland, the risks are just as severe. The Highway 16 corridor, known as the Yellowhead Highway, is the lifeblood of the Canadian North. It is the primary route for food, fuel, and medical supplies moving between the coast and the interior. Volcanic ash from a major apex eruption, carried by the prevailing westerly winds, would saturate this corridor in hours. Modern jet engines and heavy-duty diesel truck engines are not designed to breathe volcanic glass. A single significant eruptive column reaching the stratosphere would effectively paralyze the entire northern half of British Columbia. This isn't just a matter of cleaning up dust. It is about the total collapse of the logistics network that sustains communities from Terrace to Prince George. But the most alarming discovery of 2026 remains the synchronous breathing of the submarine systems. The Hecate Strait monitoring network, established in the wake of the crisis, has detected that the Apex Caldera and the Delwood Seamount are acting in a coupled rhythm. When one inflates, the other reacts. This suggests a vast interconnected magmatic complex that spans hundreds of kilometers of the Canadian seafloor. We are not dealing with a single volcano, but a regional tectonic engine that is waking up after 4 centuries of slumber. In December 2025, the research vessel John P. Tully deployed the most advanced subsea seismometers ever built by Canadian engineers, placing them directly into the vent fields of the Apex crater. The data they are sending back right now shows a constant, low-level vibration, the sound of the Earth's crust struggling to contain the pressure from below. In response to this growing threat, the federal government has allocated $450 million Canadian dollars for the Pacific Tectonic Initiative, a massive effort to build a robust tsunami and volcanic early warning system that rivals those found in the most geologically active regions of the world. New fiber optic sensor arrays are being laid across the Hecate Strait, and satellite-based INSAR monitoring is now tracking the millimeter-scale movements of the BC coastline every 6 hours. We are finally treating the Pacific Northwest with the geological respect and fear it deserves. What is happening beneath the Hecate Strait right now is one of the most significant geological stories of our generation. It involves ancient tectonic forces operating on a scale that dwarfs our human structures. It involves hidden volcanic systems that contain more energy than 1,000 nuclear weapons. And it involves millions of Canadians whose safety depends on our ability to interpret the data before the ground gives way. The Apex volcano is no longer a silent giant. It is a pressurized system looking for an exit. I will keep following every new study, every GNSS offset, and every seismic swarm that comes out of the Geological Survey of Canada, because this story is far from over. The events of 2026 were just a prologue. If this investigation gave you a clearer picture of the hidden forces shaping the Canadian landscape, subscribe and turn on notifications. New analysis based on verified scientific data from Natural Resources Canada and provincial surveys goes up every week. If you know someone living on the coast or someone fascinated by the raw power of our planet, share this. Because in the face of a waking giant, awareness is the only defense we have. The clock is ticking, and the data is the only thing that will tell us when the time is up.